Hilchis Temurah Perek Revi. Now in Perek Gimel, the Rambam discussed the Temurah. What's the din of the Temuras? What do you do with the Temurah? So we learned the Temurah of an Oila, Temurah of a Shlom, Temurah of a Teida are Nikrav al Gabi Mizbeach. The difference is only when you get Teida, there's no lechem. But the Temurah of an Oila, a Shlom, and a Teida are all Nikrav al Gabi Mizbeach. And al derech zeh, we'll soon learn that the vladis of a Shlomim and a Teida have also a din of a Shlom, because we're talking about Korbanos Nedava. So the vlad is an extension. It has the same din like the original, like the mother, like the makra kedusha. Now, b'negei an oila, as we said, a tmur of an oila is nikrav al gabe mizbeach. An oila itself can't have a vlad because an oila is a zachar. So in mela, so it's not shaykhs to speak about the vlad of an oila, but it's shaykhs to talk about the vlad of a tmuras oila. So the tmuras oila is nikrav al gabe mizbeach, and al derech zeh, the vlad of a tmuras oila is nikrav al gabe mizbeach. As we'll learn b'hemshich. Perek Revi, Ketzad din vladis hakochim. Is vlad shlom, and al derech zeh, the vlad of a tmura shlomim, is arei eluki shlom. So just like the tmura shlom is nikrav al gabe mizbeach, the vlad of a shlom, and al derech zeh, the vlad of a tmura shlom is arei eluki shlomim. V'hein atzmon ki shlom l'chol davar, they have all the dinim of shlomim, which means it's toin smicha and chazav v'sheik and tnufa, all the dinim of a shlom. Just like we learned b'negei tmura shlom. V'chein vlad ha-toida, and also the vlad of the Temurah of a Teida, Zarelu Yikrav Kavateda. So they also are Nikrav Kateda. Ella, She'ena Tunin Lechem, She'en Mevin Lechem Eli Mateda Atzma, Shnem Al Zevach Ha Teida, so you don't bring a Lechem, not for the Temurah's Teida, not for the vlad of the Teida, and certainly not for the vlad Temurah's Teida. So we learn that Olav, Vilei Al Vlad of Vilei Al Temurah, Sekmesha B'yan. Bamedvar Mamurim, that should be Makriv, the vladis of the Shlom, and Al Derez the vladis of the Teida, that's bevladis atzma, just the first vlad. Avol vladi vladis, if that vlad itself had a vlad, in other words, you had a shlomim, and that shlomim had a vlad, and that vlad also had a vlad, is einam craving to be makriv. The second vlad, the vlad of the vlad, einam craving. Why? Shemetech ma'asav nikar shu masha isam legadol mehem adorim adorim, and therefore lefichol kainsin say, and therefore v'lei yakriv. The knas was that you shouldn't be able to be makriv, but even though mikra the dinner really should be makriv it. But there's a concern that we see over here that he's masha isim legadim amadorim adorim. Now what's the concern that he's megadim amadorim adorim? So the Rambam Pirish Mishnayos writes because you're being aver on baltacher. You know, you're being masha isim adorim adorim, aver on baltacher. And Rashi says that the problem is because we're concerned that maybe you'll be over on gizav avedi. Rashi and Temurah says that you'll be over on gizav avedi. That's the concern over here. That's one difference between Rashi and the Rambam. There's another issue. The Rambam just says, "Leficho kein tzneisi v'lei akrivin." So the Rambam Aruch is medayik that Lashon Rambam is mashma that the pshat is lei akrivin, but on the other end, you could go ahead and wait till it gets a mum, and then you paid it. Masha'in kein the Rashi and Temurah says that as a result of that, the knas is that you actually have to wait till yamusu. That these vlad the vlad of vlad is yamusu. Halacha beis. Vlad hachatos yomus nochmos. So we learned b'negea shlomim and ateda that the vlad is are you able to be makro al gabe mizbeach. So the vlad of vlad is mitzad the kshash. So they gave a knas because you're being mashit lagad ladorim vadorim. So they made a knas that leyakrivim. Now vlad hachatos. When we're talking about vlad hachatos is yomus. That's one of the chatois amesis is vlad hachatos. The ain't tzarich lema vlad tumurasa because the tumuras hachatos itself is mesa. So the Temuras Achatzis is Mesa, and its Vlad is certainly Mesa. Now there is that the Vlad Achatzis is Mesa. Now Halacha Gimel, Hasheichet is Achatzis, Umotzaba ben Arbochai. So a Gemara of the Gidl knows the full birth, full term would be Chamisha. This is ben Arbochai, it's still not full term, but it's Chai, it's already alive. Motzah ben Arbochai. So the din is Harezu Necheles Kipsar Achatzis. So this Vlad, even though we learned that Vlad Achatzis is Mesa, but over here, that's a Vlad Achatzis that was born. Masha'inkin over here, this Vlad wasn't born. So it was Nimtza b'mei imei, and it was Nechuta through the Shchita Simei. So Mela, Zarezu Necheles Kipsar Achatzis, Shevlodi HaKotchim b'mei imam heim Kadeshim. And Mela, the Kodesh b'mei imam, so Mela is part of the Chatos. So therefore, this Ben Arbochai is considered part of the Psar Achatos. Now, the Rambam says Ben Arbochai. The emes is that if L'moshel Legabi Hilchas Macholas Asuris, if a person shechs a behema, and you find in the behema a ben chamisha chai, it's already a full-term birth. Nevertheless, it was huta b'shchita simei. It's huta b'shchita simei, even if it was a ben chamisha chai. So the Ramara brings from the Griz that Medaik, that the Ram Taka holds Taka Beneged, the din says the din is the Vladi Achatois is Mesis. A Vlad of Achatos was in the Mesis. Now this is not really a Vlad Achatos, because Lepel was Nimsa Meime. But nevertheless, since it looks like a Vlad Achatos, it's Vice Tois, if it's full term, so then you wouldn't be able to eat it. There's Achatos. Chamisha Chai, so then you wouldn't be able to eat it. It would have a din like a Vlad Achatos, and therefore Yoms. Mashenkin, if it was Ben Arba Chai, so even though it was Chai, but since it was only Ben Arba, so therefore it's considered part of the Chatas, and Memela you're allowed to eat it. In other words, beside Hilchas Macholas Asuris, beside Shchita, Be'emes, even a Ben Chamisha was really Nishchat HaYideime. But nevertheless, the special din by Chatas, Vice Din D'Rabbanan. The Rambam doesn't really say it clearly. The Rambam doesn't touch Uis. What would be if it would Ben Chamisha? The Rambam just says it would be Ben Arba Chai, is Arezu Nechelis. The Rambam said before, Vlad Achatas Thomas. Doesn't tie choice what's the din Hasheichet is Achatos u'matzah ben Chamisha Chai. Halacha Dalet. Vlad Temurah Sa'asham uVlad V'loda at Seifa Elam is Yiro at Shipul Bamum v'Yimochru v'Yiplud Neim Lundava, which is really the din of the Temurah Sa'asham. A Temurah Sa'asham is the din is that an Asham can be brought. Again, a Shlamim, an Oila, they could be brought as Nedavas. Mashayikam Asham can be brought as a Nedava. So here you have a Temurah Sa'asham. So this Asham is a Chiv, you have to bring as a Kapara. And the Temurah Sa'asham, the din we learned before was that Yira Achipul Bimum and V'yipul D'meim L'Nedava. So Nedava, which means for Kais HaMizbeach, for the Elis of Kais HaMizbeach. So Al Derech Zed, the Vlad of a Temurah Sa'asham, and Al Derech Vlad Temurah Sa'asham, you can't speak about a Vlad of an Asham because an Asham is a Zohar. So Vlad Temurah Sa'asham, uVlad V'loda at Seifa Elam is Yiro at Shipul Behamum v'Yimochru v'Yipul D'meim L'Nedava. That's the first din. Now then there's another din, the Yolda Zohar, Acha Shehikra V'Shamei. If this Temurah Sa'asham was Yolda Zohar, Acha Shehikra V'Shamei, so then Havlad Atzma Yikra V'Ela. So then the Vlad itself, you don't have to wait till Yira at Shipul B'mum, but Havlad Atzma Yikra V'Ela. Now this is a Chidush to say. Normally the din is if a behema is not royally karv al gabe mizbeach as is, so the vlad is also not royally karv al gabe mizbeach. So l'chura this Temuras Asham is not royally karv al gabe mizbeach. The din is that yirach yipul b'mum v'yipul d'meim l'nedava. But nevertheless, the din is that the vlad of this Temuras Asham, even though the mother is not royal karv al gabe mizbeach, but if the Asham was already nikrav, so then you could bring this Vlad al Gabi HaMizbeach as an oila. And the reason for it is because even though it's coming from a mother, which can't be Nikrav al Gabi HaMizbeach, but it has a Zayda, the Asham, the original Asham, which is royally Karv al Gabi HaMizbeach. So therefore that entitles the Vlad of this Temurah also to be Karv al Gabi HaMizbeach, because it's a Kedusha. There's a Kedusha which is originating from a Kedusha which is any royally Karv al Gabi HaMizbeach, could never be Nikrav al Gabi Mizbeach. But this Kedusha of this Vlad, of the Temurah, is not really originating from the Temurah. It's originating from the Asham, which was which was before the Temurah. So the Asham obviously can't have a Vlad. The Asham was a Zachar. But if the Temurah had a Vlad, so it could be Nikrav al Gabi Mizbeach. The emes is that even if the Asham would be alive, Be'etzim you'd be able to be makriv this Vlad HaAsham, which is a Zachar al Gabi Mizbeach. Just concerned, there was Xavier the Rabbanon, if you can be makriv before you were actually makriv the Asham, there's a concern, maybe you'll use this Vlad as an Asham, which you cannot do, because it's coming from a Temurah. So therefore, the din is Azoy. Nachamal, an Asham, a Temurah of an Asham is Yirachi Yipul Bamum, and then Yipul Dam of Linadova. The Vlad of a Temurah Asham is the same din, but if there's a Vlad of a Temurah Asham, which is a Zachar, and the Asham was already Nikrav before the Vlad, so then in Yolda Zachar, no, it's not if it was Yolda Zachar and then, but if it was Yolda Zachar and then now you want to use the Vlad. In Yolda Zachar, Acha Sheikra Vashamay, you already Makra Vashamay. And now you still have the Temurah, and that Temurah had a Zachar, so then in Yolda Zachar, Acha Sheikra Vashamay is a Vlad Atzma Yikra Vela. Now Hikriv Nishem in the Keval Hashamay, the Yolda, So Mela, this nekeva was never royally carved al gabe mizbeach. Is tira hi ubno achipul bamum v'yimachru v'yavid b'nei shmeim lashami. Yavid b'nei shmeim lashami. So you have to bring with the money of side the mother and side the vlad. You bring an osham. They're both yir achipul bamum. You can't bring even if the vlad is a zachar, but it's coming from a nekeva, which the nekeva is not royally carved al gabe mizbeach. V'imkar kikriv hashami. Is then again yiplud meim l'nadava, but you cannot use the vlad of this nekeva, which you will mark the shlosh shami, because it's not royal agam mizbech. That's like the rule is again, if you have a hegdish, which that hegdish is not royally karv al gabe mizbeach, you cannot be you can't bring its vlad al gabe mizbeach. You can't bring its vlad al gabe mizbeach. Only in the case, as we said before, but again the osham, where there was a Temurah of the osham, and then the Temurah had a vlad, which was a zachar. So since the original osham was royally karv al gabe mizbeach, so al derazeh, the vlad of this Temurah's osham, if the vlad was born after the original, the osham was already nikra al gabe mizbeach, you already brought an osham, so then you're allowed to bring it as an oilam. Amos, you're allowed to bring it as an oilam even before it was brought. But there was exerted their abundance, so therefore it's only if it was born after it was already brought al gabe mizbeach. Halacha hey, the same thing will have b'negei oilam. Vlad Temurah se'elam, uvlad vlad at seifa elam, harei ke'elam. Behein atzmam yikruvu eila. Again, an oila is a chazachar, so oila can't have a vlad. But the Temurah of an eila is a din of an eila. So the Temurah of an eila is nikrav al gabe mizbeach. And the vlad of a Temurah se'eila is also nikrav al gabe mizbeach. Harei ke'eila. Behein atzmam yikruvu al gabe, hein atzmam yikruvu eila. Now, in the case over here, this Temurah's oila, obviously the Temurah's oila had a vlad, it can't be nikrav as an oila. We're talking about an nekeva. So if you have an oila, and then you have the Temurah's oila, which was in a nekeva. So the Temurah's oila, which is in a nekeva, is yir achipul bomum, and v'yavid meim oila. But nevertheless, the vlad of this Temurah's oila, which was a zachar, if it was a zachar, so then the vlad could be nikrav al gabe mizbeach. And the reason for it is because lepel, since the original is an oila, which could be nikrav al gabe mizbeach, so even though from this oila was transferred to a Temurah, which was in a cave and it cannot be brought al gabe mizbeach, but from the Temurah came a zachar, and that could be brought al gabe mizbeach. That's pashta din. And again over here, there's no din of vlad vlada, because bishlema over there, b'negeya a shlamim, there's a concern because the shlam is nechal lebailim, so therefore there's a concern that you can be gadol mehamadorim adorim. Mashaykim in oila, which is kula lemizbeach, so there's no kshash of being megadol mehamadorim adorim, so there was never a gzeira on vlad vlada. Let's read again. Vlad Temurah se'ela. The vlad of a Temurah se'ela. Again, you can't speak about the vlad of an eila because an eila is a zachar. So the vlad Temurah se'ela, uvlad vlada, at seifa eila, is arein keila, v'arein atzmam yikruv an eila. Even though the Temurah can't be nikruv as an eila because it's in a keva, but the vlad could be nikruv as an eila. Now that's talking about if you had originally an eila zachar and then you had a Temurah and a keva. However, hifresh nekeva leilas. If a person was mafresh and nekeva leilas of the yoldo, is afal pishiyoldo zachar. But since the original carbon is not royally karval gav mizbech was the chanekeva, so then the din is yir achipul bimum v'yavi b'dam of eilas, and then you bring b'dam of eilah because you cannot go ahead and use this vlad because this vlad is coming from a kedusha which is not royally karval gav mizbech. Kfar b'yanu b'maisa korbanos shekol mokum shano emrim yiplu l'nadavu. When it says yiplu l'nadavu, who? What does it mean yiplu l'nadavu? Sheyitin hamois b'shefres. So in other words, you go ahead and you wait yirat shipul b'mum, and then you go ahead and the money of this, the value of this behemoth. So you take the money and you put it in the shefres shoyibamik. The shefres was like a box, which was on the bottom wide and the top narrow, which looked like a shefer. Shebiyanu b'shkolim kamehem. And which shafers, there was 13 shafers over there, and which shafers went for Kais and Mizbeach, who Bezdin, Makriv, and Beis, and Amois, Eilis and Dova. And with that money, the Bezdin would be bringing Eilis and Dova, and Veniskei and Mishum Tzibur, and over there you would have to bring with an oil, you bring the Sachim, so that the Tzibur would pay for the Nesachim. Ve'enam Tmun Smicha, there's no din of Smicha, it's not an Eilis Yachid, Eilis Yachid is Toin Smicha. Avol Mokim Shenemar, who Atzme Yikra Veila, Eyav Bedama Veila. So then Harezu Tuna Smicha, so then this person, the owner of this Eila is the one that does Smicha, and also in Suchem Shalei, he has to bring together with the Eila, he has to bring the Sach. So we learned about the Vlad of a Shlomim, we learn about the Vlad of a Toida, the Vlad of a Chatos, the Vlad of an Osham, and the Vlad of an Oila. We learned in Perek Gimel that a Pcher, there's a special din that a Temurah of a Pcher is not Nikra al Gabi Mizbech. It says Lashem Hu, so we learn out Hu, V'lei Temurase. That's the din. Now there is a Meiser, the Temurah of a Meiser is not Nikra al Gabi Mizbech. So what do you do with the Temurah of a Meiser and the Temurah of a Pcher? You wait until it has a Mum. So by a Meiser, it's Nechal Bailam. And by a Temurah of a Pcher, the Temurah of the Pcher is given to the king. Now when you're talking about the Vladis, so when again Meiser, you could also say the Vlad of a Meiser, just like the Temurah of a Meiser, it doesn't go al Gabi al Mizbeach. So al there is the Vlad of the Meiser doesn't go al Gabi Mizbeach, so you have to wait until it has a Mum, and then it's Nechal Bailam. Masha'enkim Menegei Pcher, but the Pcher itself can't have a Vlad because the Pcher is the Chazachar. Masha'enkim, the Temurah of a Pcher could have a Vlad, and just like the Temurah doesn't go al Gabi Mizbeach, so al there is the Vlad of the Temurah also doesn't go al Gabi Mizbeach. And Mela, when it has a mum, when this Vlad of the Temurah has a mum, so then that Vlad is also given to the Kain, or give it to the Kain before it has a mum, and then the Kain, when the Kain eats it b'mumah, he's not makriv al gabi mizbech. That's halacha vav. Now Vlad ha-meiser, the Vlad of Meiser, or a Vlad Temuras ha-meiser, or the Vlad of the Temuras ha-meiser, now there is a Vlad Temuras ha-pcher. By ha-pcher you can't talk about the Vlad ha-pcher because it's a zocher. So over here we're only talking about the Vlad of the Temuras ha-pcher. Uvladi v'ladi seim at seif ha'elam is harei elu le'yikru. There's no, you're not makriv al gabi mizbech, because we learned before that just like the Temurah you're not makriv al gabi mizbech, al there is a the Vlad is not makriv al gabi mizbech. We learn from the pasuk Lashem Hu Ela yiru achipul b'mum v'yochlu kibcheru k'maisa shnafel b'mum. So then they eaten kibcheru k'maisa with shnafel b'mum, which they're eaten without pidyon. Now Vlad is Temuras ha'pcher is l'kein. Vladis Maisut Muras is Lebalov. So just like the Meiser is Lebalov, so al there is that the Vladis of the Meiser and its Temurah is also Lebalov. And by a Kain, just like the Pcher is Lekain, so the Temuras HaPcher is Lekain, and al there is that the Vlad of the Temuras HaKain is also Lekain. Halacha Zayin. Vlad Temuras HaPesach has the same din ke Temuras HaPesach. Now we learned, if you were made the Temurah of the Pesach on Erev Pesach in the afternoon when you were supposed to be makriv as a Pesach, so then the Temurah is nikra itself as a shlom, because since it already has the kedusha of likarev, so therefore that kedusha is transferred into the Temurah, that the Temurah is also likarev. Masha'enkin, if you made the Temurah before the afternoon, in the time when you weren't able to be makriv the Korban Pesach as a Korban Pesach, so then that kedusha of Korban Pesach doesn't have that kedusha because it's not royally likarev. So the Temurah is also not royally likarev. So what happens with the Temurah is that you have to be Yirachi Yistav, and then V'yavi V'domeh Shlom. You don't bring the Behem itself as a Shlom, the Temurah itself as a Shlom. You rather bring Yavi V'domeh Shlom. Now that is at the Vlad. The Vlad depends, if it's a Vlad of a Temurah, which is going to be Atzmi Nikriv Shlomim, so just like we learned before, Temurah of a Shlom, so the Vlad is also Nikriv as a Shlom. Masha'enkin, if it's the Vlad of a Temurah, which the Temurah doesn't have that Kedusha, which it could be Nikriv Atzmi Shlom, because it was a Temurah of a Pesach, of Kedem Chatzeis, so then the Vlad also is Yira at Shiistayv until he gets a mum, and then you buy with that money also a Shlom. That's this din. Allah Chazayin. Vlad Temuras HaPesach has the same din ke Temuras HaPesach. Sim hoise imei kreva Shlom, if that the Temurah will be Nikrev Shlom, so which means that it was the Temurah was done on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, so then Vlad Yikrev Shlom. Vim hoye dina shetimacher v'yavi v'domeh Shlom, because it was done before Chatzeis. So then Avlad and Nimkar v'yavi v'dam of Shlom. Now this is talking about the Temurah of a Shlom. Now Hikrev nekeva lepische v'yolda. So now keva lepische obviously is not royal akrova. Pesach has to be a zocher. Hikrev nekeva lepische v'yolda. Shehifrisha mu'beres. L'chatchila you mafresh both of them. The mother and the Vlad which is inside is he who Vlad yiru. So both of them are yiru. Achipul b'mum and v'yavi b'dmei and Pesach, and you bring with dmei and Pesach. You bring with Dmei Pesach, and that then is even if the Vlad is a Zocher, but since the Vlad is a Zocher, it's part of the mother, which is in the Keva, so therefore the Vlad is not royally carved as a Pesach, so, and because it was part of the mother, which is not royally carved as a Pesach, so therefore you could only go ahead and Yiru, Achipul, B'mum, and V'yipul, you buy within a Pesach. Now, V'm Nishara, and the Keva Zoad Achar Pesach, Eshiyol da Achra Pesach, so now you only have the Vlad Achra Pesach. So then again, Tirehi of Vlad Achipul Bemum, V'yavi with Meim Shlom. So since they were originally, you can't bring it itself as a Shlomim, because it was originally Mugdash, Be'efim Kazeh, that it's not roy to be brought al Gabem Mizbeach. It was Mugdash, Be'efim Kazeh. So even though B'chlal we say, Balichayim Nidokim, but over here, when you were Magdash something, Be'efim Kazeh, that it's not roy L'karv al Gabem Mizbeach, because you were Magdash it as a Pesach. And Lepel, it wasn't roy to be brought as a Pesach, the mother was an Akeva. And even the Vlad was part of the mother. So Mimela, so when now, after Pesach, with a normal Korban Pesach, where you're Makrish as a Korban Pesach, and it's royally Karval Korban Pesach, and Lepel, you didn't bring it as a Pesach. So after Pesach, you bring it as a Shlom. You bring the actual Behemoth as a Shlom. Mashenken over here, since when you were Magdash it wasn't royal to be brought as a Korban Pesach because it was in the Keva. So also, side the Behemoth, side the Vlad, is even after Pesach is Yiru Achistavu, and then you bring with Bidmeim Shlom. That's Nishir, the Keva Zuad Achra Pesach, Hishiyol Achra Pesach, is Tirehi of Vlad Achipul Bemum, and V'yavi Bidmeim Shlom. Halacha Ches. Vladis HaKotshim Shiyotzu Derech Deifen. There was a Caesarean birth, which is not roy to be a korban. Eshiyoldu Tumtum Vadregenes, or V'kilayim Utreif. In other words, Kilayim means that a different type of animal mated with this kotchim, and as a result of that there was a vlad which was kilayim, or the vlad that was born was a treifa, which they're all not roy to be a korban. So the din is harei elu yipadu. You have to be paid to them because they're vlad of a kotchim. They're being paid. You don't have to wait for a mum because eilucha mum gadol mizeh. Knows all these things are not royal to bring as a korban. So meil harei elu yipadu v'yavi b'dmeim korban harayu lahavi b'dmeim vlad shulzu. Whereas if they would have been a Vlad Haroy, so then there would have been different dinim. It depends on which karbanis. Certain karbanis they would itself would have been brought as a carbon, and some karbanis Yavi B'dmeim, whatever the dinim that we learned till now. So al derech zeh, these Vlad is hakachim, which are not royal lemizbeach, so you don't have to wait for a mum. Hareli yipadi, you pay to them right away, and you bring with them whatever carbon would have been brought with these Vlad is hakachim. Halacha tes, Vlad balas mum is Harehu Kivlad Hatmimo L'chol Dover. And therefore, V'yikrav Karoyle, the fact that the mother is a Balmum doesn't change the dinim of the Vlad. So those dinim that the Vlad would be Nikrav, so it would be Nikrav even if the mother was a Balmum. And al that is that those Vladis, which the din was Yirachi Yistaiv, and then the Yipulud whatever the Meim is, so al that is that the Vlad. The fact that the mother is a Balmum, it doesn't make a difference. Now this din, when the Rambam says Vlad Balasmum, he means only a behema which originally was Nigdash, Kedushas Haguf, didn't have a mum. So Memela the Kodesh was Kedushas Haguf. And then it had a mum. So even though right now the mother has a mum, the Rambam doesn't touch Ruiz, but that's Mukhrach to say. Because the Rambam already said, there's a previous Rambam, which we had in Sulam Megdoshim, that over there the din was that if you have a behema which was originally a balas mum, and therefore when you magdash it, so it's only Kedushas Dom, not Kedushas Haguf. So then, when it has a Vlad, the Vlad is Nivda without a mum. Whereas the Vlad is Nivda without a mum, so the Vlad is not really Kodesh Dushas Haguf, because the mother is not Kodesh Dushas Haguf. So you can't say over here that this Vlad has a din of Vlad Atmima, that the Vlad has a din of a carbon. If we're saying that the mother didn't have Kedushas Haguf, and the Vlad also doesn't have Kedushas Haguf. So that's talking about when it was a Baal Mum before the Kedusha. Over here, the Ram doesn't touch yours, but it's Mukhrach. Vad Baal Mum means you're talking about Kotchim. That kotchim was magdashed when it didn't have a mum, and Memela, so it was Kodesh Kedushas Haguf, and then this behemoth got a mum, and then it had a Vlad. So then the Vlad of this behemoth, since it's behemoth Kodesh Kedushas Haguf, just that technically you can't bring it al Gav Mizbeach because of the mum. So then the Vlad of this behemoth is as if it wouldn't have been a Balmum. Halacha Yud, Kotchim Shipilu Nefel Shilya. So there's a kedusha that's coming from a Mokim Kodesh. And therefore you cover Varei Masur Mano because they're coming from a Mokim Kodesh. Allah Yudalf. Hamishana is a Kotchim Kedusha Kedusha. Eva Belesa said there's a law to be Mishana Kotchim from one Kedusha to another Kedusha. Shenamer Bebcher Liyagdish is Esei. So we learn now Shal Yasenu Eila Ishlam. You shouldn't take this Bcher and make it into an Eila or a Shlam. V'adil Lishar Kotchim Ein Mishana Nesim Kedusha Kedusha. And that's Echad Kotchim Mizbeach, like we're saying to take a Bcher and to make it into a Shlum or to a Deila. Ve'echad Kochi Bedek Abayis, even Kochi Bedek Abayis, there's also an Isser to Mimshanim L'Gdusha L'Gdusha Ketzad. Mehigdish L'Bedek HaHechel, you had in mind that you want that this money should be designated. There was a general in Bedek Abayis, vice to is that it's general money. It goes into the general kupa, and that general kupa does all kinds of different things with it. But if a person goes ahead and he's magdish, he wants it to be L'Bedek HaHechel, he wants it specifically to go and to fix whatever is needed in the Hechel. And there's also things that are needed to be fixed in Mizbeach. So if you would have given the money for general Bedek Habayas, but pastors, it can be used for either. Masha'inkin, since you specified that it's Lebedek HaHechel, is Le'yishana, Lebedek HaMizbeach, V'chein Kol Kietz B'zeh, V've'en Leikin Alavzeh. There's no malchus for this shinui of changing from Mikotchim to Mikotchim. Halacha Yud Beis. Ketzad Marim Malabcher, Lagdishe Lemizbeach Hegdesh Acher. So although we said that you're not allowed to go ahead and make a bcher into an oila, that's a lav, liyagdish ish eisei, which means you're not allowed to be mishan mekdusha l'kedusha, but there's a way of getting around this din, so to speak, and being able to be ma'ir through harama to be magdish a bcher hegdish acher. What do you do? Magdishe bebeten kedem sheyivolet. You're magdish the bcher while it's bebeten, before it's actually gives birth. Shnema asher yevukar l'Hashem liyagdish eisei. Which means Yivukar means when it was already born as a B'cher. Mishe Yivukar. Once it was born as a B'cher, Iyata Magdishe. Avalata Magdishe Bebeten. But while it's Bebeten, it wasn't yet Yivukar, it wasn't yet born as a B'cher, so then you could be Magdishe. The Fichak Yeshler Leimer, person can say, Mashib Meyesh Mevakerezu. Because whatever is in the Meyayim, the womb of this Mevakeres, of this Behem, which is about to give birth, which is going to give birth, and going to give birth to a B'cher, is imu zachar harizuela. If it's a zachar harizuela, no. If it's in a keva, so anyways, it's not going to be a b'cher, so he can do whatever he wants with it later. Mashenkin over here is trying to avoid it being a b'cher, so he says imu zachar harizuela. Aval eini yochel leimer zivchei shlam. This is a din d'Rabbanan. She'eini yochel afkia esem mikudushasei kedei lihanes bei. In other words, if he's saying harizuela, so he's giving it lemizbeach. So rather than giving it to the kain, he's allowed to go ahead and make it into an oila and give it lemizbeach. Masha'inkin over here to go ahead and say that arezu shlamim, so basically he's going to use it. He's going to have hanah from the boss, so that he's not allowed to do. Im Omar im Yitzias reiv reishei yiyah. It was already reiv reishei of this behemoth came out as a b'cher, and now he's saying yiyah ela, and he's a b'cher ve'ina ela, because as soon as reiv reishei came out, it has a din of a b'cher, and so you can't go ahead and change it. Halacha Yud Gimel ve'im marim and al behemoth's hegdish. Lahagdish ubra kedusha acheres. In other words, a person has a behemoth of hegdish, and he wants to go ahead, he has a shlomim, and he wants to say that if this child, if the uber is a zocher, he wants it to be an oila. So he can't do that. Emarim al behemoth's hegdish lahagdish ubra kedusha acheres, because a vlad of a shlom is the chashlam. Now, if the vlad was a zocher, so he wants it to be an oila. So he says no. Emarim al behemoth's hegdish lahagdish ubra kedusha acheres el harei kedushas ume. Why? The vlad of the kochim is already has a din shlom while it's me'imim. It doesn't have to wait till yivukar. Kimei shebianu. Memele barei kol uber mehem kedushas imei. The vlad of the kochim is already kochim while it's me'imim. And what kind of kochim is it? And kol uber mehem kedushas imei has the same din of kedushas imei. And therefore, ve'ene yochel hashas neise babeten keder hashas bebcher. The reason why a b'cher helps the harama is because by a b'cher the kedusha is ershchal asher yivukar. When it comes out as a b'cher, that's when the kedusha is chal. So before the kedusha was chal, you could go ahead and say of this mevakeres should be an oila. If you have a shlomim, for example, you have a dekeva shlomim, and it has inside an uber. So you can't go and say that this uber, which is inside the shlomim, should become an oila, because while it's inside the shlom, it already has a kedusha shlom. In other words, it has a kedusha, and the kedusha is kedusha simei. So maybe you can go ahead and change it for a shlom. The Rambam concludes Hilchos Temurah. He says, "Aval pi shekol chuki ateirik gzeiros bechlal the chuki ateirik gzeiros k'mishabiyanu b'seif beila." The Rambam over there spoke about the importance of having the right attitude towards the gzeiros of chukis hamelach, to understand the derech eretz a person is supposed to have towards the chukis of the Eibishter. But nevertheless, which is talking about those things that have no time. That's what the Rambam speaks over there. That just like you're not allowed to be male behegdish, so al derech you're not allowed to be male in the chukim, so to speak, in the gzeres hamelach, even if they have no time. If a person doesn't understand the time of it, but nevertheless, the Rambam says royal is bein ben. You're supposed to be mizbeinen in the chukes, in the gzeres, which the chukes atera. V'chol ma she'ata yochel litn litam ten litam. If a person has an ability of understanding somewhat of what's the kavana of these chukim, so a person is supposed to try to give a tam. Mashat yochel little litam, ten litam, a person should give a tam. Hariyomu chacham rishenim shamelech shleimi haven reva tam shel kol chuki atayr. He understood reva tam of all the chuki atayr, except for paraduma. So the mele, so al derech a person is also obligated to look at the chukim and understand the chuki atayr. So here we have a din that you're not supposed to make temurah, and if you do make temurah, the din is v'hayehu temurah siyah kedush. So now here the Rambam is going to explain the reason for temurah. Yiroli shejesh amar hakosov v'hayehu temurah siyah kedush. What's this havana of this din? That today says a person's coming along and is trying to exchange this behemoth for another behemoth. And now the Torah tells you that both of them should be hegdish. What's pshat? In Yishenemer, just like we find another mitzvah. The pasuk says, "B'im hamagdish yigal es beisei." So there's a person who was magdish his house, and now the magdish himself wants to be goyel the house from hegdish. B'im hamagdish yigal es beisei. So the din is v'yosef chamishes kesef erke cholov. If another person is magdish the house, he gives according to the value. Masha'enkin, if the magdish is being goyel the house, being yigal is basic, so he has to add of a fifth. What's the havon of this din? So the Rambam says, Yor the Torah l'seif machshavas ha'adam uktsas yitzri yara. The Torah understands the person's mind, and he understands his yitzri yara. Shetevish ha'adam neita laharbis kilyani v'lachas ha'mameni. A person naturally is worrying about his money. He worries about his money. He wants to have as much money as possible. He doesn't want to spend money that he doesn't have to. V'afal pishan nodar v'higdash. L'churi is a person that's generous. Is there's a concern that now he had charata of his generosity, and now he's going to be paid for less than its value. Not only he shouldn't take away from the value, but nachmar yesef chemish. So that's the din b'negevim ishes higdish basic higdish, and then v'chenim higdish behema kedushas haguf. The Shema Yachzer Bey, and the Kim is Eina Yachzel of Desa, so he's going to have a Charata, and Eina Yachel of Desa, so the Mela Yachli Fana, but Pusimimana. He can't be paid because it doesn't have a mum. So he's going to go ahead and exchange it for something which is of lesser value. V'im titule Rishus Lahachliv, Hara, but Yafim, the Torah will say, all right, you can exchange it for something which has a greater value, but we're concerned, there's a concern, Yaakov Hayafa Bara, V'yemer Tevel. So in other words, there's a concern that a person is going to go and try to, he knows he was taka magdish behema, but he wants to exchange it for not such a good behema. Now if the Torah is going to tell you, don't exchange it for not a good behema, you can only exchange it for a better behema, there's always a concern that he'll exchange it for a behema that's not as good, and he'll tell you that it's a better behema. Is lefichav, therefore, as a result of that, sasum akasim b'fanu, the Torah closed it, shalayachlu, the Torah says, don't exchange it. Whereas Torah knows that a person may want to exchange it in order to have, because he has charata for his generosity, and therefore the Torah says don't exchange it. Fakir the knasi, the Torah gave him a knas im heklif. V'amar v'hayehu temurah siyah kedush. So the Torah gave you a knas. So in other words, the idea of temurah is just like we see benegeh that there's a hisofas chemish in order to prevent a person from being paid for less than its value. So al derech the Torah says by temurah you shouldn't exchange it because there's a concern you may exchange it for something of worse quality. And the Torah says if you do exchange it, everything should be kedush, inside the original behema, inside the behema that you're being exchanging it for. So mela, obviously that'll cause a person not to exchange it. V'chol elu advarim, and all of these things of the Torah is they lock of his yitzrei, to subdue his yetzer hara, or l'saken diyesav, and to be misaken his deis and his midis. V'reiv dini atera einel le'etzis mirachik. All the dini atera, reiv dini atera, are etzis mirachik migdela etzah, from the Eibishter, which is called the gdela etzah. L'saken adeis, to misaken everybody's deis, l'yasha kol ha'maisim. V'cheinu eimer Halikasafti lechoshalishim b'me'atzeis v'das. So the Eibusha gave us halachas and dinim and eitzes b'me'atzeis v'das. Lehidiacha koishet imri emes, the truth, the very essence of truth. Lahoshiv amorim emes l'shelchecha. Slikulu hilchas Temurah b'siyayta d'shmaya and nigmar sefer tshi v'hu sefer korbanis. And here's some Rambams has the hilches of shisha halachas of the 6 halachas in sefer korbanis uprok of chamisha v'arboim, and has 45 prokim in sefer korbanis. The Rebbe L'Chasichas in Chelik Hamad Beis asks that L'chura, the Rambam in his Akdamah to Pirkei Avos, the Shmeina Prokim, so over there the Rambam writes that B'negeya Chukim, a person's supposed, the Chazal say, Al Yemer Odom Efshi B'Psar Chazir, El Yemer Efshi Umal Esa Shavish V'Shmaim Gozer Alai. So the Rambam says that's talking about Chukim. Since we're dealing with Chukim, something you don't understand, so male, a person's supposed to say B'Emes Efshi, because there's no really, I don't feel anything reason not to do it. It's just that Mo'esa Shavish V'Shmaim Gozer Alai. That's going on Chukim. The Rebbe is asking, how does that Rambam in Akdamah to Pirkei Avos stem with this Rambam? Here the Rambam is saying you're supposed to find reasons for Chukim. So once you find reasons for Chukim, so then it becomes Efshi, because he understands the reason. And over here the Rambam seems to be saying that's what the Rambam seems to be saying over here. And over there the Rambam seems to be saying no, that a person is supposed to remain the Chukim, and the Chukim is in a way that Mo'asa Shavish V'Shmaim Gozer Alai doesn't understand the Gzeira. That's the Rebbe is asking like a stira between this Rambam and the Rambam in Hakdamah to Pirkei Avos. Now that the Rebbe brings that in Meir Nevuchim over there, even if there's time mitzvahs, but there's time only to the klolos mitzvahs, and to the prati mitzvahs there's no time. Even the prati mitzvahs, even after all the time to the mitzvahs, but that's only in the klolos mitzvahs. But the prati mitzvahs, on that there's no time, and on that those prati mitzvahs still remains what the Rambam says over there in Pirkei Avos, that a person should say Efshi. He shouldn't say Efshi. He should say Efshi when he get the prati mitzvahs. Or b'mo'asa shavish v'shmaim gozer alai.